Kaspar Veld never wanted a complication, not until he saw her file. One photograph. One woman standing outside a Vancouver shelter, with a cardboard box in her arms and rain soaking through her jacket. One line beneath it, handwritten by his associate. She knows what her father did. That was enough. That was the order he gave himself before he gave it to anyone else. Find her. Bring her in. Elara Finch thought distance was a kind of armor. She had spent 2 years building it, methodically, the way you patch a leaking roof in November when you cannot afford a contractor and the rain is already coming through. She left her father's name behind in Calgary. She left her phone, her credit cards, the apartment above the bakery where she had started to feel safe before she understood what safety cost in that family. She came to Vancouver with a duffel bag, a work history no one could question, and a talent for systems she had taught herself out of boredom and necessity. She was good at finding vulnerabilities in software. She was less good at recognizing them in people. Her friend Claudette opened the door of a third-floor walk-up in East Vancouver before Elara had finished knocking. One look at the rain in her hair, the controlled expression that meant she was holding something together from the inside, and Claudette pulled her through without a word. They sat in the kitchen under a light with a loose bulb that flickered when the upstairs neighbor walked. Claudette made tea, neither of them drank. "My father called," Elara said. Claudette went still. Elara had told her pieces over the years. Enough for Claudette to understand that those 2 words, "my father," landed differently than they did for most people. "He told me there was a debt," Elara said, "that it had come due, that there were men who expected something from our family and that I was." She paused, the most negotiable asset he had. Claudette covered her mouth. "That cannot be real." It was very real. The way he said it was the worst part. Calm, like he was explaining a wire transfer. Elara stood and went to the window. The street below was glossy with rain. A truck idled at the corner. She watched it until it moved. "My mother left me an account," she said, "years ago. She told me not to tell anyone about it, not even her. She said some resources only work if no one can reach them before you do." Claudette's eyes softened. She knew. Elara did not answer right away. Then she said yes. I think she knew longer than either of us did. 3 blocks away, in a parked sedan with the engine running, a man picked up his phone and sent a single message. "She is inside. Friend confirmed. 2nd floor, east-facing window." In a private office on the 38th floor of a building in downtown Vancouver, Kaspar Veld read the message and looked at the photograph again. He had built his reputation on precision, not cruelty, though his industry had room for that too. Precision, knowing what a situation required before the situation finished explaining itself. He had expanded 3 port contracts and 2 logistics corridors in the last 18 months by understanding, before anyone else did, where the pressure points were. Elara Finch's father, Raymond, had borrowed money from a man named Victor Hesch. Victor Hesch was a particular kind of problem that Kaspar Veld spent most of his professional life managing. And Raymond had, in a move of spectacular foolishness, used access codes belonging to Kaspar's freight operation as collateral he had no right to offer. The codes were recovered. Raymond was not Kaspar's concern, but the daughter who apparently understood those systems, who had worked inside her father's import business for 2 years before disappearing, who had, according to 3 separate sources, documented things she should not have documented. She was a different matter entirely. His driver asked if they were going to the hotel. Kaspar looked out at the wet city. "Take me to the east side." For 5 days, Elara lived in Claudette's apartment like a woman who had gone to ground and was not certain how deep to go. She set up her laptop at the kitchen table and applied for contract work, remote systems audits, the kind of thing that paid in transfers and asked no questions about office location. She kept the curtains at an angle. She memorized the building sounds, the elevator that groaned on ascent, the neighbor's cat that cried at 7 each morning, the radiator that knocked twice before heat came through. By the 3rd day, she had reorganized Claudette's pantry. By the 4th, she had labeled the spice jars. By the 5th, Claudette found her sorting takeout menus by cuisine and recency. "No," Claudette said from the doorway. Elara looked up. "No, we are going out." Elara stared at her. "Absolutely not." "Absolutely yes. You have not seen anything except this apartment and the corner store. You flinch when a car parks outside. You check your email like a warrant is about to arrive." Elara opened her mouth. Claudette held up a finger. "Everything is dangerous right now. At least this version has music and possibly decent cider." That was how Elara ended up in a waterfront bar near False Creek on a Thursday evening, wearing a dark green jacket borrowed from Claudette and boots that were technically hers but felt wrong without the rest of her life attached to them. The place was all low light and exposed brick, the kind of room that made noise feel contained, manageable. A guitarist in the corner played something that might have been jazz if you were generous about it. The crowd leaned against each other with the easy warmth of people who had decided to have a good time and were not apologizing for the decision. Elara stood at the bar and tried to remember what normal looked like from the inside. Claudette handed her a glass. "Breathe. I am breathing. You are performing it. There is a difference." The first sip was cold and slightly bitter and very good. Elara let it settle. For a while it worked. Claudette made her laugh about something from 2 years ago, a catastrophic job interview in which Elara had accidentally pointed out a live security flaw in the company's login portal during what was supposed to be a casual coffee conversation. "You watched the man go pale in real time," Claudette said. "I was being helpful. You were being a menace. The systems were embarrassing." Claudette laughed hard enough to put her glass down. Elara felt the sound move through her, and for one suspended moment the fear loosened its grip. Then a man stepped into the space beside her at the bar. Young, expensive jacket, the smile of someone who had been rewarded for it too many times. "You look like you're new here." Elara kept her eyes on her glass. "I'm not interested. That's fast. I'm efficient." He laughed as though she had been playful. Claudette had stepped away to take a work call. Elara cataloged the exits automatically. Front door, side hallway, patio steps, 2 bartenders. A security guard near the entrance who was currently distracted by a table of loud men celebrating something. The man leaned slightly closer. "I just want to talk," I just answered. His hand came to the bar beside hers, his fingers brushing her wrist. Elara moved her hand away, his smile thinned. "You always this difficult?" She turned, ready to make the scene she had been trying to avoid. A voice came from her left. Quiet, not loud enough to shift the room. Precise enough to stop the man where he stood. She said no. Elara looked over. The man standing beside her was tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing a charcoal shirt open at the collar, and dark trousers that fit without advertising the fact. His sleeves were rolled, one hand rested loosely on the bar. He was not looking at Elara. He was looking at the man who had touched her. There was nothing theatrical in his posture. That made it worse. He looked like a man who did not need to raise his voice, because the people around him had already learned the cost of making that necessary. The younger man lifted both hands. "Easy, we were just talking. You were leaving," the stranger said. A beat passed, then the man left. Elara watched him vanish into the crowd before she turned back. "Thank you." The stranger picked up his glass. "Something amber. You had it managed." "Then, why step in?" His eyes moved to hers for the first time. Dark, steady, cool at first look, something warmer underneath if you made the mistake of looking past the surface. He turned back to the bar. He did not use the moment to introduce himself or convert her gratitude into an opening. That made him more interesting than if he had tried. Elara noticed the scent. Cedar and something colder. Sea salt, maybe, or just the rain from outside. She hated that she noticed. "You're from Vancouver?" she asked. He glanced at her, sometimes not an answer. "It's the one I have tonight." Her mouth moved before she could stop it. "I'm Elara." He looked at her hand when she offered it, not dismissive, considering. Then he took it. His grip was warm and even. He released her before the contact became too much or not enough. "Brennan," he said, "just Brennan tonight. Do you always answer like you're testifying?" Almost a smile. "Do you always ask like you already know the lie?" Elara's breath caught, quietly enough that she hoped he had not heard it, but his eyes stayed on her face a half-second longer than necessary. Claudette returned then, slowing visibly as she took in the scene. Elara stepped back. "Thanks again." Brennan gave a small nod, lifted his glass, and walked toward a private booth near the back where 2 men sat waiting. The crowd adjusted around him without appearing to. He did not look back until he sat down. Then he did. Elara looked away first. Claudette appeared at her elbow. "Please tell me that's the man who dealt with the finance guy. He didn't deal with anything. He just reminded the room that manners exist." Claudette looked toward the back booth. "Who is he?" "Brennan." "Brennan? What? Apparently that costs extra." Claudette studied him for a long moment. "That man has either made a fortune or cost someone else one. Possibly both simultaneously. Helpful. He has loaded infrastructure energy." Elara laughed before she could stop it. Across the room, Brennan watched her laugh. His expression did not change. His fingers went still around his glass. The next morning, Claudette insisted on the seawall. Elara argued for 20 minutes and lost all 20. By 11, they were walking the False Creek path with coffee going cold in their hands, the water flat and gray-green beneath an overcast October sky. Claudette wore a hat that was aggressively cheerful. Elara kept her hood up and her eyes moving. It was the first time since Calgary that her body felt like it belonged to her and not to her father's accounting of what she owed. Claudette stopped to look at something on her phone. "I see someone from work. 1 minute. Elara kept walking along the water's edge. The tide was low. She climbed down to a narrow strip of shore, pebbled and wet, and stood at the edge where the water came in slow and dark. She picked up a flat stone and threw it. It skipped twice. She threw another 3 times. Something settled in her chest that had not settled in months. She did not notice how far she had walked until the seawall path behind her was further than it should have been. She turned back. The current did not concern her at first. She was not swimming, just standing at the tidal edge. But the ground shifted, a soft collapse of pebble and silt beneath her left foot, and then the water came faster than it had any business coming, up to her knees, and the footing underneath was gone. She went in. The cold was immediate and total. She kicked toward the surface, found air. The current along the inlet was not strong by ocean standards, but she was caught sideways, and her jacket was already soaked through and pulling. She was not panicking. She was making calculations. Swim parallel to shore. Find the edge of the pull. Do not fight the whole inlet. She knew this. Her arms were not cooperating with the same efficiency. Then she heard an engine. A small rigid hull inflatable cut across the water and turned cleanly toward her, slowing as it came alongside. A hand reached down. "Give me your hand." She recognized the voice before she placed it. Elara grabbed him. Brennan pulled her out of the water in a single motion that made the physics of it seem simple. She landed hard against the deck and spent several seconds doing nothing but breathing, hair across her face, lungs burning. Brennan crouched beside her. He handed her a dry emergency blanket from under the seat without being asked. "You go for a swim often in October?" Elara glared at him over the foil. "Do you always appear precisely when someone needs you?" "Only when someone makes it necessary." She sat up too quickly, the world tilted. His hand came to her shoulder, not rough, not instructive, just enough to slow her down. "Easy. I'm fine. You're shaking. I'm annoyed at the inlet." He sat back near the helm and watched her, his expression even. "Riptide along the edge. You were handling it until the silt gave. I know how to read water. I noticed." His voice was dry. "You read it correctly. Your jacket had a different opinion." The boat rocked beneath them. The seawall sat at a distance. Claudette was somewhere on that path, probably making a sound that had no letter equivalent. Elara pushed wet hair off her face. "What were you doing out here?" He looked at the water and then back at her. "I keep a boat. That is suspiciously convenient." "Most rescues feel that way to the person being pulled out." She narrowed her eyes. "You practice being impossible, or does it come naturally?" A long pause. "Naturally, but I've put in effort over the years." "What were you doing that far out?" She had not meant to answer honestly. The words came before she decided to give them. "Trying to remember what it feels like when no one is looking at you." Brennan did not reach for the sentence or turn it into something useful. He let it exist. Then he said, quietly, "The inlet has a strong pull along the north edge." His eyes stayed on her a second longer. "That it does." He started the boat and turned toward the marina. Claudette was already jogging along the seawall when they came in. She splashed through the shallows without hesitating and arrived at the boat with an expression that combined relief and fury in each of her. "Elara Finch." I looked away for 4 minutes. "I'm okay." "You were in the water with a stranger." Brennan stepped onto the dock and held the boat steady. "We've met." Claudette looked from Elara to Brennan and back. She said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "Oh." Elara pointed at her. "Don't." Claudette lifted both hands. "I said nothing." That evening, Elara sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and an untouched bowl of leftover soup going cold beside her. She was supposed to be reviewing a contract audit. She was looking at the same paragraph for the 4th time. A message appeared on her burner phone. No contact name. A Vancouver number. "Dinner. Tomorrow. 7. I'll come to you." Elara stared at it. Claudette leaned over from the couch. "Your face just changed." It did not. It absolutely did. Elara turned the phone around. Claudette read it, then pressed a hand over her heart. "He has initiative. I did not give him this number." Claudette's expression shifted slightly. "That's less charming." Another message arrived. "Claudette gave it to me. I offered a character reference in exchange." Elara looked at Claudette very slowly. Claudette turned back to the television with elaborate concentration. He asked politely, "So does everyone who turns out to be the problem?" "He also pulled you out of the inlet. That is not a credential. It is at minimum a reference." Elara should have said no. She knew she should have. She had spent 2 years saying no to anything that required trust, and she was still in a city that was not hers, in an apartment that was not hers, waiting for the world to feel safe again, and it kept not feeling safe. So at 7 the next evening she walked downstairs in a navy dress. Claudette claimed made her look like a woman who had never reorganized anyone's pantry under duress. Brennan was waiting on the street beside a dark car. When he saw her, he went very still. Not performatively, just still like a man who had expected one thing and found himself looking at something that required a different kind of attention. "You look beautiful," he said it the way you'd state a fact. "No inflation, thank you." She got into the car before her face gave her away. The restaurant was in Yaletown, tucked behind a brick building with no signage, the kind of place that did not need to announce itself. Inside it was candlelit and quiet, with windows that opened onto a narrow courtyard and staff who greeted Brennan by name without making it a performance. For the first 20 minutes the conversation stayed manageable. The city, the rain, the relentless cheerfulness of Claudette's hat collection. Then Brennan asked, "What do you do when you're not being pulled out of the inlet?" Elara set her fork down. "Systems work. Security architecture." His expression shifted by a fraction. "What kind?" "Mostly identifying where human error creates access points. Weak permissions, bad habits, trust placed in the wrong places." He leaned back slightly. "You look for where the opening is before someone else does." Elara looked at her glass. "I like knowing where the vulnerability is before it's used against me." The words sat between them. Brennan's voice dropped slightly. "Does that come from the work, Elara?" She knew what he was really asking. "I don't talk about my family, then we won't." No negotiation. No wounded expectation that she owed him context in exchange for dinner. Elara looked at him then. "Fully, you don't push." His eyes moved over her face. "I know what it looks like when someone's been pushed enough to turn it into policy." That landed closer than she was ready for. "And what about you? What do you do when you're not rescuing inconvenient women from the waterfront?" His mouth moved faintly. "Logistics, property, some freight. Sounds broad." "It is. Sounds like you're leaving things out." His eyes held hers. "I am." The honesty should have made her cautious. Instead, something in her leaned toward it, because at least it was honest about being incomplete. After dinner, they walked along the seawall. The night air was cold and wet with the particular weight of a Pacific October. Elara's heels clicked against the concrete. Brennan walked beside her without touching her, close enough that she was aware of the space between them as a thing with weight. She said, eventually, "You answer questions like you actually want to know the answer, and then you answer your own like you're preparing for an appeal." He looked out at the water. "Some answers change the shape of the room. Maybe the room should change." He turned his head. "Maybe?" Elara stopped, the lights of the North Shore reflected in long lines across the water. She looked at him, and for one moment he looked less like a stranger and more like a problem she had already decided before she finished evaluating. "I should go home." "You should." Neither of them moved. Brennan's hand lifted, slowly enough that she could have stepped back. His fingers touched a strand of hair the wind had moved across her cheek, then let it fall. "I have a place with a better view than this." "That's a line." "Yes, it's also true." She looked at him. "I don't know you. You know enough for tonight." She heard her mother's voice. "Always keep something no man knows about." She heard her father's voice. "Come home, Elara. You're not as clever as you think." She heard her own voice, the one she had been listening to for 2 years, tired and careful and right about almost everything and exhausted by being right. Then she said, "Just the view." He nodded once. "Just the view." His apartment was on the top floor of a building in Cole Harbor, all dark oak and glass, the mountains visible on clear nights, invisible tonight, but present in the way the city lights stopped at their edge. It should have felt cold. It did not. He brought her sparkling water without wine. She noticed. His reason was simple. He stated it the same way he'd told her she looked beautiful. A gentleman doesn't drink alone when the other person is already cold and wrung out. That surprised a laugh out of her. She sat on the couch that faced the window. He sat beside her, near enough that the warmth of him reached her, far enough that the choice remained hers. They watched the city for a while. Then Elara said, "I don't have much experience with this." "With what?" "Sitting with someone and not knowing exactly what they want." Brennan turned his glass slowly. "What do you think I want?" She looked at him. "I don't know, that's the issue." He set the glass down. "I want to know why you look at exits before you sit down. I want to know why a woman who can find vulnerabilities in any system she walks into can't seem to believe she's allowed to stop running." Elara's throat tightened. "That's quite a list, I know. And if I don't want to answer, then don't." She looked at him. "You are very difficult to distrust." "That sounds inconvenient." "It is." He leaned closer slowly, giving her the full length of the approach to change her mind. She met him halfway. The kiss was careful at first, a question. Then his hand came to her jaw, and something inside her that had been braced for 2 years unlocked, so fast it frightened her. She pulled back. Her breathing had changed. Brennan did not chase her mouth. He rested his forehead near hers, not quite touching. "You're safe." She closed her eyes. "I don't know what that means anymore." "Then stay until you do." She should have gone home. Instead, she lay beside him later in the dark, fully clothed, the city glowing through the glass. He lay on his back with one arm behind his head, not touching her. "My father is dangerous," she said. Brennan did not move. "If he finds me, anyone near me is at risk. Then I'll stay closer." She let out a breath. "That is not a logical response, no, but you said it like one." He turned his head. In the dark, his eyes were almost black. "Sleep, Elara." Somehow she did. Morning arrived gold through the glass. She woke to the smell of coffee and an empty space beside her. For 1 second, she did not remember where she was. Then she did, all at once, and pressed both hands over her face. Brennan came in carrying 2 mugs, hair damp from a shower. "Morning." Her voice came out softer than she planned. "Morning." He handed her coffee and sat at the far end of the couch. He did not crowd her. She noticed that. He made breakfast, eggs and toast, and they ate on the couch with the gray morning coming through the glass. For a short time she let herself pretend this was a life a person could simply choose. Then his phone rang. His face changed before he answered. "Barely. Enough." He stood and moved to the window. "Yes." His voice had shifted, cleaner, flatter. "Get everything ready. 2 hours." He ended the call and turned back. His expression was arranged back into calm, but the morning had altered. Elara set down her coffee. "Everything all right?" "Yes." She studied him. He crossed toward her and held out his hand. "I need to take you somewhere." "Where?" His hand stayed open between them. "Home." She did not take it. Brennan, for the first time since she had met him, looked almost sorry. His phone buzzed again on the counter. The screen lit for just a second, 2 words before he picked it up. "Car ready." Something cold opened in her chest. She had seen those 2 words before, in a different city, from a different kind of man who organized people the way other men organized furniture. Elara looked at his open hand. "Home," she repeated. "Yours or mine?" His silence was the answer. She stood slowly. The chair made a soft sound against the floor. Her pulse was quiet but gaining speed. She reached for her phone on the counter. Brennan's eyes dropped to the movement she noticed. "I need to call Claudette. You can call from the car." "No." She put the phone in her pocket. "I'll call now." Something hardened in the air between them. "Elara." His voice was low and careful. It was the tone of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and had chosen, up to this moment, not to use it. "Who are you?" His eyes stayed level. "You know me. I know the version who drinks good whiskey and answers questions like every word is worth something." She kept her voice even. Her hands were cold. "I'm asking who you are." He looked toward the city once, as if calculating what the view would cost him to give up. Then he said, "My full name is Kaspar Veld." She did not blink. The name settled through her like a blade, finding the space between ribs. Kaspar Veld. Freight corridors, port access. The man her father's handler had mentioned with an entirely different register in his voice than the one people used for ordinary businessmen. Her throat narrowed, but her voice came out flat. "You're the man my father made a deal with. Using access codes that weren't his to offer?" Kaspar watched her carefully. "Yes." She laughed once, small and empty. Then looked around the apartment as though the furniture itself had conspired. The coffee he had handed her, the blanket from the night before, the sparkling water instead of wine, all of it rearranged itself into evidence. "How long did you know?" He did not answer fast enough. She nodded. "Before the bar." Kaspar moved forward. "I knew your name. You knew I was running." "Yes." "You knew why." He stopped. "Elara. I knew you were trying to get out of something you had not chosen. Your father attached your name to it." He stopped. "And I came to see who you were before I decided what that meant." She looked struck by that, not comforted. "Struck. You slept beside me. I didn't take anything from you. You took the truth." He looked as though that landed, not dramatically. Kaspar Veld did not perform pain. It passed behind his eyes and went somewhere deeper. She backed toward the door. "I'm leaving, Elara." The word was quiet, absolute. She stopped. "You're not safe. Your father has people moving. Then let them move. At least I know who they are." That landed differently. His eyes sharpened. "You think that makes them safer to run from? I think you don't get to decide where I go." "I was protecting." "No," she said. She pointed at him, her hand steady despite everything. "You decided when you saw my file and thought I was something you could contain." His face went still. She saw the truth of it arrive in him. Not all of it enough. He moved to the door. "There's a car outside. I'm not getting in it, you are." She looked at him steadily. "Make me." He turned back then, and the man standing in the morning light was not Brennan from the bar, not the quiet presence who had handed her sparkling water and kept a careful distance. This was Kaspar Veld. His voice was low. "If I have to choose between your anger and your safety, I will take your anger." Elara stared at him. "You sound exactly like my father." For 1 second he looked like she had struck him. Then something settled and he opened the door and spoke to someone in the hall. A man in a dark jacket appeared. Elara's stomach dropped. Of course, There were always men. There had always been men. You can walk to the car with me, or I can have your bag carried and carry you myself. I would prefer not to make this worse than it already is. Her laugh came out sharp. You already did. She walked ahead of him. She refused to be moved like an object. Outside, an SUV waited under the porte-cochere. The driver opened the rear door. My things. Your bag is already in the car. Claudette knows you're going to Victoria with me. She's been told you're fine. Elara turned very slowly. You contacted Claudette before I woke up. Kaspar's voice stayed controlled. I made sure she wouldn't panic. You arranged my life while I was asleep. I brought it within reach. No, she said. You brought it within yours. She got in before he could say anything else. Kaspar sat beside her. The partition went up. The city moved past in the window, the seawall, the water, the mountains, holding steady in the north, like they hadn't noticed any of this. He tried once. I did not come to Vancouver to make you trust me, he said. I came to understand what your father had exposed. She kept her eyes on the window. That must be very convenient for your conscience. His hands rested on his knees, open still. I used my middle name, that is all. She turned. That is your defense. He looked away first. A small, furious part of her was glad. The safe house in Victoria was a heritage building, near the harbor, stone and dark wood, the kind of place that looked like a bed and breakfast from the street and felt like a bunker once you understood the security. Beautiful in the way of fortresses, if you were not the one being kept inside one. Elara looked at it. This is where I'm supposed to feel safe, Kaspar answered quietly. This is where your father's people cannot reach you without going through me. She turned. You still don't hear what you're saying. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her late 50s stood in the entry, silver-haired, unhurried, with the composure of someone who had managed difficult situations for long enough that composure had become her actual personality. Her eyes moved from Kaspar to Elara and softened. Elara, Kaspar said. This is Vera. She runs the property. Vera did not make a show of the welcome. You've had a long few hours. There's food on the table if you want it. The kindness almost undid her. Elara stiffened against it. Thank you. Footsteps on the stairs above. A woman in her early 30s descended, sharp-eyed, dark-haired, carrying a tablet with the energy of someone who had been managing logistics since before breakfast. She looked Elara over without pretense. Kaspar said, my associate, Ingrid. Ingrid looked from Kaspar to Elara. So this is the one who documented the access codes. Elara looked at her evenly. And you must be the one who found me. Ingrid's expression shifted. There was something in it that was not quite approval and not quite its opposite. Kaspar's jaw moved. Ingrid. Ingrid lifted her tablet. I'm just glad someone in this situation kept records. She moved past them toward the back of the house. Kaspar showed Elara upstairs himself. The room prepared for her was quiet, pale walls. A window looking over a garden going dormant in October. Her bag sat on the chair, everything placed, everything arranged without her permission. She opened the bag and saw her things folded inside. Someone else's hands had touched every private thing she owned. She closed it. Roman stood near the door. There is a bathroom through there. My room is at the end of the hall. Elara looked at the door along the wall. Of course it is. It locks from your side. How thoughtful. His patience thinned. She could see it. You can be angry tonight. But tomorrow I need to tell you what's actually happening with your father and Victor Hesch. She turned. There is nothing to discuss. I'm leaving. He crossed the room. Not fast, not threatening, just inevitable. You can call yourself whatever you want right now. But the world outside this building knows your name is connected to mine. Your father made sure of that when he offered my codes as collateral. My enemies know. Victor Hesch knows. And I am not going to be your weakness. He stopped in front of her. His eyes dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to hers. The problem, he said quietly, is that I already am. The room changed. Elara hated that the air shifted, hated that her body remembered last night, the dark, the careful distance he had kept because he had said he would. She lifted her chin. You lied. Yes, you took me. Yes, you don't get to make that sound honorable by saying it quietly. His eyes hardened. And you don't get to pretend that refusing protection is the same thing as being free. Elara stepped closer. Freedom is choosing who I trust. Something moved across his face then. Not certainty, something older, a recognition. He reached into his jacket and placed her phone on the dresser. I'll have dinner brought up. I'm not eating, you will when you're ready. He walked to the door. Before he left, he looked back. When I was Brennan, that was not a performance. I want you to know that. Elara's voice came out quiet and deliberate. Then Brennan should have told the truth while he still could. Kaspar left. The door closed. She stood still until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, picked up her phone, and called Claudette. Claudette answered before the first ring finished. Elara. Oh, thank God. Are you hurt? No, 2 men came to the apartment for your bag. They were extremely polite, and somehow that was more unsettling. I know. Where are you? Victoria. Elara looked around the room, the closed door, the arranged bag. The phone returned as if it were a privilege. I'm fine. That's not the same as okay. Claudette went quiet. Then, I'm coming. No. Elara, I am not letting you get whatever this is without backup. Elara almost smiled. It broke partway. I don't know what I'm doing. Good, Claudette said. That means you're still thinking for yourself. Call me in the morning. After they hung up, Elara looked at the black card on the nightstand. No name on it. No limit printed anywhere. Just the card left like an explanation that didn't bother explaining itself. She picked it up, turned it over. Then she set it back down and went to the window, where the harbor sat dark and cold below, and the lights of the city held their shape in the water. And somewhere in this building, Kaspar Veld was deciding how much truth to give her now, that she'd already stopped believing in him. She had grown up watching her father make those calculations. She knew how they ended. The morning came gray and raw off the straight. Elara had slept in fragments, each one waking her at some door-closing sound or shift of the building. By 6, she gave up and dressed. Downstairs, Vera had coffee on. Kaspar was already at the table, a phone in one hand and a document open in front of him. When Elara walked in, he looked up, scanned her face the way he had been doing since the waterfront, checking for something she hadn't given him a name for. She sat across from him and poured her own coffee. Ingrid came down the stairs. She set her tablet on the table and sat without ceremony. Victor Hesh has been in contact with Raymond again. Last night. Elara's fingers tightened around her mug. She did not look at Kaspar. He looked at her. Your father told Hesh that you have documentation. Financial records from the import business. Transactions that connect Hesh to 3 shell accounts. Elara said nothing. Do you? Kaspar asked. His voice was careful, not threatening. Careful, the way a man is careful when he is trying not to close a door that hasn't finished opening. She looked at him. I kept records because my father's business made no sense and I was the one running the inventory systems, and I do not like things that don't add up. What kind of records? Transfers. Port of entry flags that got cleared without inspection. Names attached to freight manifests that shouldn't exist. Kaspar set down his phone very deliberately. Elara, I know what I have. Do you know what Hesh will do to recover it? She met his eyes. I know what my father will do if I hand it over to him. She paused. The same thing he always does, nothing that costs him anything. The table went quiet. Ingrid looked at Kaspar. There it is. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at Elara. Can I see them? She studied him. If I show you, you'll know where the exposure is. Yes, and you'll protect yourself before you protect me. He looked at her without flinching. Or I'll know exactly who to send these to before Hesh can reach either of us. Elara held his gaze for a long moment. The rain came harder against the window. Vera moved quietly in the kitchen behind them. Ingrid was watching something on her tablet with the focused expression of someone who was listening very carefully. Elara opened her laptop. She showed him. It took 2 hours. Kaspar asked questions that were precise and non-reactive, the questions of someone who already knew the terrain and was checking her map against his. Ingrid took notes. Vera brought more coffee without being asked. By noon, they had a clear picture. By 1 o'clock, Elara had realized that the documentation she had been protecting for 18 months was, combined with what Kaspar already held, enough to dismantle Victor Hesh's operation on 3 fronts. She sat back. Kaspar looked at her. You could have given this to the RCMP a year ago. She looked at the table. And my father would have made sure they looked at the access codes first. Yours. He went very still. You were protecting my operation. I was protecting the only leverage I had, she said. That is not the same thing. He looked at her for a long time. The rain moved on the glass. Then he said, I owe you an honest conversation. Elara looked up. I came to Vancouver because of the codes. He did not look away. I told myself it was containment, that I needed to understand what you knew and decide whether you were a risk or a resource. She watched him. That was true for approximately the first hour I spent, watching you reorganize Claudette's pantry from across the street. Elara stared at him. You were watching the apartment. My associate was. He met her eyes. I was in the car, and I had already stopped thinking about containment. She looked at her coffee. Then what were you thinking about? A pause. About the fact that someone had frightened you badly enough that you sorted tea in alphabetical order to feel safe, and about what kind of man does that to his own daughter. Elara pressed her lips together. Kaspar's voice was quieter now. I went to the bar because I wanted to see you without the context of the file. I told myself it was due diligence. He paused. It was not due diligence. She looked at him. You still lied. Yes, for a long time. Yes. She considered him across the table. He did not soften it or reframe it. He let the weight of it sit where she placed it. That was the thing about Kaspar Veld that she had not expected. He did not spend energy managing her reaction to the truth. He just told it and stayed inside the consequences. She exhaled slowly. The records go to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit today. He nodded. All of them, she said, including any exposure on your freight accounts from the legacy codes my father borrowed. He looked at her steadily. Yes, that will raise questions about your operation. His mouth moved faintly. My operation can answer questions. It has lawyers. Elara pushed the laptop toward him. Then let's do it before I change my mind about trusting your lawyers. He reached across the table, and for one moment their hands were both on the keyboard, and neither of them moved to change that. Then he started typing. The filing took 3 hours. Ingrid managed the secure transfer. Kaspar sat beside Elara while she verified the records, not hovering, not directing, just present in the room in the way that had started to feel different from the way other presences felt. When it was done, Elara sat back and put her hands flat on the table. Now what? Kaspar closed the laptop. Now we wait for them to move before Hesh realizes what was sent. She looked at him and my father. His expression did not harden so much as settle. Your father made a choice when he used your name. Elara nodded. She had known this, had known it for a long time. It did not land gently. Kaspar said quietly, You are not responsible for what he built. I know, but you have been carrying it. She looked out the window at the garden, bare and cold and not asking anything of her. Yes, he did not follow the sentence with anything, did not try to lift the weight or reroute the conversation somewhere easier. He let it be what it was. After a moment she said, I need Claudette. I'll have someone pick her up from the ferry. She looked at him sharply. He met her eyes. Or you can call her and tell her the ferry schedule. Whichever you prefer. She picked up her phone. Whichever I prefer, she repeated. He said nothing, but his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Claudette arrived at 4 o'clock, wearing a bag over each shoulder and the expression of someone who had been forming opinions about this situation since the ferry left Sawasan. She walked into the house, looked at Kaspar once, looked at Elara, and then at the coffee on the table. You have good coffee at least, she said to Kaspar. Thank you. That is not a compliment. She turned to Elara. Are you okay? Real answer. Elara thought about it. Getting there. Claudette sat down. Then catch me up. I have thoughts. The next 3 days were not simple. The federal filing set things in motion that moved faster than Elara had expected and slower than fear wanted. Raymond was contacted. His lawyers began to distance themselves within 24 hours. Victor Hesch's freight licenses were suspended pending investigation. Kaspar spent long hours in calls that made his voice go flat and efficient, the voice she was learning to recognize as the one he used when the work required him to be certain rather than honest. She found slowly that she could tell the difference. He was different in the evenings. Not softer exactly. More present. He asked her questions that were not about the files. He listened to her answers as though they mattered past their informational content. On the third night, Elara stood on the back terrace in the cold, looking at the harbor, and Kaspar came out and stood beside her. She said, I thought I would feel different when it was done. Different how? Lighter. He looked at the water. Sometimes it takes longer than the evidence. She turned to look at him. Why did you really come to the bar that night? He looked back at her. I told you. You told me some of it. A pause. The cold moved between them. I had the file for 2 weeks before I went looking for you in person, he said. I could have sent Ingrid. I could have had the codes traced without ever being in the same room. He paused. I read every document your father produced in 12 years, and somewhere in it was a record you had flagged with a margin note that said this doesn't make sense. Find the original. She stared at him. He met her eyes. I wanted to know who wrote that. I wanted to know if she was still doing it. He looked back at the water. She was. Elara looked at her hands on the railing. Cold metal, solid. You're still leaving things out, she said. Yes. She waited. I am not a simple man to be near, Elara. What I do is not clean. What I'm moving toward is cleaner than what I inherited. But it is not finished, and I cannot promise you it will go quietly. She was quiet for a moment. What are you promising? He turned toward her. That you will know what room you're in when you're in it. That no decision about your life will happen without you in the conversation. That the man who told you to stay until you understood what safety felt like was telling the truth even when the name was wrong. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Brennan was not entirely a lie. No, he said. He was the part of me that was hoping you'd make it complicated. Elara laughed quietly and was surprised by it. Kaspar reached over and covered her hand on the railing, not asking anything, just there. She did not move her hand. The formal arrangements with the RCMP took another week. Kaspar testified to the access code history. Elara provided 3 hours of technical documentation in a conference room in Victoria, with 2 agents who asked good questions and a Crown attorney who took notes in a way that made her feel, for the first time in years, like someone was actually recording the right things. Raymond took a negotiated agreement. The terms included full financial disclosure and the dissolution of the import business. Elara did not attend any of the hearings. She watched the notifications appear on her phone in the kitchen of the Victoria house, where Claudette was making too much pasta and Ingrid was critiquing the recipe with the confidence of someone who had never actually cooked it. When the final notification came through, Elara set her phone face down on the counter. Claudette looked at her. "It's done," Elara said. Claudette turned off the stove. She crossed the kitchen and held out her arms. Elara went to her the way she had gone to her in Vancouver 2 years ago, and the way she had gone to her since they were 22. And the world kept being harder than expected, and she let herself be held until the shape of it settled. Kaspar appeared in the kitchen doorway, saw them, and quietly turned around and went back down the hall. She noticed, that evening, after Claudette and Ingrid had graduated to debating the merits of sourdough in tones that suggested it was personal, Elara found Kaspar in the study at the back of the house. He was reading something on his laptop. The lamp made a small warm circle on the desk. She sat in the chair across from him. He looked up. She said, "I want to go back to Vancouver." He nodded. "When?" She looked at him. "I want to decide that." "Yes, I want my own apartment, not connected to yours." "Yes, I want to keep the contract work under my own name." "Yes." She studied him. "You're agreeing very quickly." He closed the laptop. "I spent 2 weeks treating you like a file and 10 days watching you treat yourself like someone who has to earn the right to decide things." He met her eyes. "I'm done contributing to that." Elara was quiet. He said, "I would like to see you in Vancouver on terms that are yours, whatever that looks like." She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp, the rain outside, the sound of Claudette laughing at something Ingrid had said in the kitchen. She said, "It might look like dinner," he said. "I know a place." She almost smiled. "I know you do." She went back to Vancouver on a Tuesday. Her own cab, her own ferry, Claudette beside her with an enormous travel coffee and a list of apartment listings she had been quietly curating for a week. The city looked the same, gray and wet and alive with its particular Pacific urgency. She had been afraid it would feel smaller after everything. It felt like itself, which was enough. The apartment was in Mount Pleasant, 3rd floor, east-facing, with a kitchen window that caught an hour of morning light, and a building whose elevator worked half the time. She signed the lease on a Friday. That evening, Kaspar Veld stood on her new doorstep with 2 paper bags from a noodle place on Main, and the expression of a man who was trying very hard not to look like he had been thinking about this moment for longer than was strategically advisable. She opened the door. "You found it. You live here." He held up the bags. "I researched the neighborhood." She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped aside. He came in, set the bags on the counter, looked around at the boxes and the bare walls and the single lamp she had unpacked first, because some things are necessary before everything else. "You have nothing in here yet," he said. "I have a lamp." He turned. "You're not wrong." Elara pulled down 2 mugs which were also unpacked and started the kettle, which was the first thing she had put in a cabinet. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall because there was no furniture yet, and she sat across from him with the bags of noodles between them and the lamp making its small circle, and outside the window the city moved through its ordinary evening. She handed him a fork. "No idea what this is like. I trust your neighborhood research. You shouldn't. I've been wrong before." He looked at her steadily. "Not about the things that matter." She looked back at him. Then she opened the bag. They ate on the floor of her empty apartment in Mount Pleasant, in a city that had looked for her, and a city she had chosen, and the rain came down outside the way it always did. Unhurried, with no opinion about what happened beneath it. After, she sat with her back against the wall and her shoulder just barely touching his, and she said, "I'm not going to stop looking for the exits," he said. "I know, but I'm going to start picking the rooms I walk into." He turned to look at her. "Good." She looked at the lamp in the corner of the empty room, the small, certain light it made. Kaspar Veld had found her in a photograph and given her a false name and brought her somewhere she hadn't chosen, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, he had also held a door open and stepped back and waited to see what she would do when no one was making her. She had come back. She put her hand over his on the floor between them, and neither of them said anything else, and the rain kept going, and the lamp stayed on. And for the first time in 2 years, Elara Finch did not check the exits before she decided to stay.